Hi everyone, I am Shivang Chandna, founder of Past Modern, here in conversation with Ankush, who is an engineer turned artist, a part of the collective studio Baroda, represented by the Sakshi Art Gallery in Bombay. I am very curious to learn about his journey, the transition from being an engineer to an artist, and what he has in store for the next years to come.
I was a good science student, but drawing came to me naturally. I there was one subject that I always wanted to engage with since I was young. And when the moment came after my passing on my 10th, so a mutual decision was taken that probably engineering would be the best thing for me because I'm a good science student. And at that time, there was not much information in a small town about the space of arts and how do you take these things further.
Yeah.
Although I really wanted to, I saw at that time JJ school and all that I was looking, but I also couldn't gather much information how I would proceed.
How did you even have information of JJ School? Because I know of it because I've read about it on Instagram, socially, but back then there was no internet, nothing.
So, in fact, it came later because after the 10th, I finished my ICC board. My plus one and plus two was done from a government college.
Okay.
So, it's one of the oldest government colleges in Punjab. And there I used to engage with people, and they had an arts faculty. So, they would talk about these are ideal colleges to Shantiniketan and these things.
Yeah.
But, I had never gone out of Punjab. Our summer vacations used to be fixed to Jammu and coming back from Jammu. So these were all alien spaces. How would you go? And those ideas of were very abstract in that sense for me.
Even like the idea of a art school in itself
Yeah.
must be very, very foreign to you.
Yeah. So although I tried to convince, but then we mutually thought that probably working hard and getting an engineering seat in a government college in Punjab would be the best thing. And that's how I ended up studying engineering.
So when I was in school, I always saw people who were smart but also good in drawing would tend to move towards architecture a lot, just because they had engineering drawings, that structural drawings. Was that something that you had entertained as an idea or no?
So no, architecture never came to me, and I'm not sure why, because I was told. But for me, the act of drawing was something that I really enjoyed.
When did you begin drawing?
I mean, I would remember we had this subject, strangely used to call that class was not called the arts class when we were young. It was called SUPW.
Okay.
It was an activity class, but ended up usually just having art classes, which was drawing and
So it was supposed to have multiple things,
Yes.
but it only ended up being drawing.
yes, and probably later there was knitting and all those kind of things become part, but dominated by drawing and painting later on watercolors and all that. So that is how I started engaging with drawing, and but I never thought that I would actually pursue arts. I think that was once I started my engineering, my world of drawing still took over in spaces of circuit drawings, mechanical drawings, because first year was, although I did electronics, but the first year is a foundation course where you study everything from mechanical to electrical, everything. So that remained with me always. And my weekends, even in the college and when I was working in the corporate, my weekends would go drawing or painting, engaging with this as a practice.
Still, it made you feel happy through and through, just the whole process?
I don't know about happy, but for me, it was something that I wanted to engage with. And I think it it took precedence over everything I would otherwise like to do. So like when I joined Samsung and we were just 5 engineers, in that sense, I was lucky because I had a lot of opportunity to travel because the company was growing in Asia and we were formatively had joined Samsung. We were engineers who were given opportunities to travel.
This was what year?
So I finished my engineering in 2008.
You're engineering from?
So it's a government college which is called Malot Institute of Management and Information Technology.
Okay.
So I finished in 2008 and I joined the same year Samsung.
Nice.
The research and development group in India. And I think that space of traveling, I used to, like, if you have to travel to China or Japan or Korea or other countries, I would actually, my weekend itinerary would be to visit museums or art studios or at least the spaces of arts. So I think that kind of engagement brought a lot of clarity of what I wanted to do.
So Samsung basically sponsored your art education.
They certainly, I mean, of course, I have a credit to give to my, because I always say it's not a sad story. I think for me it has been a journey of a quest and engaging with what came to me. I think I was very happy with what I was doing as an engineer,
Yeah.
but my travel opened the world for me, and that point I knew that I wanted to engage with arts. So a lot of things made sense when I saw the museum, especially the post-war art, and I engaged with other cultural activities and music, especially the Western classical. There was a kind of affinity that I had towards them. So
When you were in India, were you engaging with art also, like going to museums or trying any of that?
yes, absolutely. Because when I was in Delhi, because I shifted from Punjab to Delhi for my job,
For
because
Samsung, yeah.
yes, it was in Noida. So I would make sure that I will go to the National Museum or I would go to the galleries whenever I'll get time. I mean, remind you, because we were in the development space, the work hours were really long and sometimes weekends working. So whenever I will get a chance, so whenever I'll get a chance, I would actually go to galleries, museums, whatever I could manage at that time.
Do you remember any one artist or a specific art movement that made an impact on you?
So the minimalism movement in Korea, because that was my first engaging points, because I was traveling Seoul. I think that became one of the spaces I started engaging with, and the Western classical music, especially opera. I still remember one of these moments where I was listening to the opera performance. I couldn't understand what was really, and you know how it is, but I had goosebumps. So something that really touched me in that moment. I think that moment is something I always remember. I think in some sense that's what I wanted to engage with arts. That became the primary push also.
Was it the power of something that transcends like language, translation,
Absolutely.
everything that
Yes.
just becomes a moment in time of its own?
Yeah. So those things and traveling, I was engaged with artists, but I wouldn't say I was very informed at that point.
But you
It
were
was,
curious enough to sort
yeah,
of go and
yes.
explore, right?
Yes, I was very curious to know and to engage with this idea. Whether or I will take it further, that was not in my mind at that time. I was practicing art.
When you say practicing, you were drawing, sketching.
Yes, so I in weekends would go just drawing, painting, and
Would you do abstract ideas from your mind, or would you imitate someone or a setting?
so the initially, if you see my works, when I actually shifted from Punjab to Delhi, I think this whole space of the mall, the pop culture, the burgeoning city, it all pictured within my work. So these were like long scrolls of these landscapes, which were kind of bright pop culture colors that I was using. So those became a part of my language. So something like a vertical growth, because in small cities you can see the horizon.
Yeah.
And so they were like visual encounters with this change of the landscape, I would say. I think later, probably when I quit my job, I in some way knew that what I wanted to do, what I wanted to engage with. So, and what my space of articulation or investigation as an artist would be. So, but yet I wasn't very informed in that space because I was not from an arts college. And is the moment when I met Rekha Rodvitia and Surendran Nair, with whom I live and I reside with them in their own space right now. And they offered me a 1 month residency in Baroda. So at that moment,
And you had never been to Baroda before?
no, I have never been to Baroda. And for me, that one moment becomes a very defining point in my life as an artist, as an individual, I would rather say, And so I shifted to Baroda for a month.
This was what year?
This was 2014.
So 2008 you began working with Samsung.
Yes,
6 years you worked.
No, I worked for 4.5 years. I worked with Samsung. Then I quit my job. I was for the very long time just working in my own head. I was working on my own, but then
You were painting, you were making art.
yes, I was making art. And in 2013, what happened? One of the recent friends who was from an arts college, she informed me about this Glenfiddich Awards, and she said you must apply for them. And I did apply for that. I got the opportunity for the best 5 artists, and for that year is when I met an artist called Veer Munshi. He's a senior artist, and he was also from Kashmir. So I think in the post presentation, he offered me his space to come. So I spent almost 1.5 years in his studio. So I was assisting him with his installation because he primarily did installations along with doing my work. And post 1.5 years, I met because Rekha and Surendran were his contemporaries, and they came, and that's how we met. And they offered me a 1 month space in Baroda, which was a kind of collaboration between the collective studio and this fabrication unit, which kind of deals with scrap metal and all those things.
Usually in every industry, I think there's a lot of competition amongst the peers. But here, what I'm hearing from you is that artists are supporting each other a lot. It seems like a more collaborative effort.
Yes, I think that space is very prevalent. Yes, I mean all what do you call fields are competitive, but I think you still find people who I did, and I would rather just talk about myself. I did find because it's a phase. I think it's not even a registered organization where they get tax benefits. There is no barter from young artists like usually in residencies you have to give your work as a barter. There was nothing like that. It was just out of their belief in something that they were doing, and they were giving back to the arts. So when I was there were almost 7-8 young artists who were in the collective studio, and my mornings till evening will go in this fabrication unit where I was doing this sculpture with this scrap metal. And in the evening when I'll come back, our dinner conversations will be from music, cinema, art, literature, all varied fields, which I felt very inadequate initially because I wasn't very informed in those spaces.
Was it intimidating?
It was, but it was also challenging, and it was also motivating, I would say, to know more. And in my heart, I thought if I would come back to this space and be part of this collective where I would, because I think for me as a young artist, I found that space would nurture me and would keep my mind ticking. So before I left, in informal conversations on the dining table, I was told if I would like to come back anytime. And I just then replied that I would really love to come back. And I finished my commitments in Delhi, went back, and after a month, I packed my bags, shifted to Baroda, and Baroda since then has been home for me. It's very rigorous training, especially for young artists, because it was at least a practice of 15 to 16 hours of practice every day. So we will be engaging with conversations 12 at night and 6 in the morning, 2 in the afternoon. I think there was a lot of space to engage with. We had a specific curriculum for music, we had a specific curriculum for cinema, and then when I was, along with my practice, I was dedicated to students who had just finished their degree from the arts college to teach me art history. So along with my practice for the first 3-4 years,
you also had to
I
mentor.
do a kind of a parallel course which anybody would do in an arts college through art students. So that I think became a very a space which became a kind of fulcrum for me as an artist to place myself. So, and since then, Baroda has been home for me. And right now, I'm one of the artists who's living and residing in this space, because rest of them have their own studios and they are living in their own spaces. And so it's a space of commitment for me now. So, yeah.
That's amazing. I mean, also more amazing to hear that there's a structured program.
Yeah.
Because I think generally there's an idea that if someone is an artist, they probably have a lot of leisure time. They think about what they want to make, and then they spend like months and months making that one art piece. But from your conversation, it seems that there is a whole regiment as to how you even become an artist, how you educate yourself more, so how you immerse yourself more in the space, and that helps you cultivate your art much more
Yes.
better, much further.
Yes, I mean, I think when it's been the philosophy of collective studio, and of course for me as well, because it's the act of working every day. Sometimes the romanticized idea of artists and the inspiration, and suddenly they start working. I think, talking about myself, I think it's just been an everyday act of working in my studio. Even on the days I may not want to engage, it gives me something to follow that 14 hours of everyday studio practice, apart from when I'm traveling, and I have a very specific time of reading because I love reading. Or on the weekends we have some hours where we have a collective studio, where we watch movies and things together, and then we are talking about engaging with the idea of not only saying why you like or don't like. I think it is the act of engaging with why that makes it more specific to articulate why.
It's that consistent search.
Yeah, so I think that certainly has been part of my training, and something I still practice and continues to be my part of my studio practice.
Let's rewind a little. When you were drawing in school as a kid, do you remember the first drawing you showed your parents and they said, "Wow, that is really nice"?
No, I don't think so. I remember in that sense, but it was very academic. It was things that the teacher will give you to draw. But then
Usually it
again,
begins with like the mountains, you see a
mountains,
river,
yes,
there's
of
a
course.
house.
I think that kind of a thing. But then I think what I remember, I started drawing from memory of what I would see as animations, because I was a child who would like to stay in my room sometimes and be on my own. And also, I had engagement when I would play sports outside. So,
Where were you consuming animations from? TV was
so yeah,
not big then.
TV was. I mean, I still remember. We in fact were it what you call 2D animation. I would rather say, not the animation that we see today, which was all hand done, and
Yeah,
then you
yeah.
would see these educative programs. Especially, they used to come in the summer vacations. There was a
This was on
specific
Doordarshan.
Doordarshan, and we were also very fortunate because our place Sushapur is very close to Pakistan, the border. So we used to get PTV, and I remember PTV used to show a lot of theater at that time. And so all these things from memory, some portraits, landscapes, and also the curiosity of looking at cross border, how the landscape in those channels was very fascinating.
Was that also like conversation around you, what cross border is or what that whole period meant? Or
Not necessarily. I wouldn't say that was part of growing up. It was much more what I was seeing through TV, and a space of maybe what sometimes talked about partition and things happen. But I wouldn't say it was a kind of a very in-depth conversation. It was much more as very information when I was young. But I think my travels to my family home, where the other part of the family had migrated,
in Jammu.
Jammu, that became a space where a lot of things we engaged with this idea of displacement, and the longing for home, which we couldn't understand at that time, because I think a person who's suffered it, I think it's very different, very difficult to measure that personal loss for anybody.
Yeah.
You can empathize with that, although you some way are part of it in the larger space, but you haven't directly witnessed it. So I think that's where I would say, in little bits, is that would be my engagement as somebody young growing up, and then in Punjab you had the Punjabi culture, and you had friends who were outside from Punjab, and then the stories of emergency, and so I think, but I wouldn't say it impacted me right then, but it became a part of me growing up,
But then,
certainly.
when people around you were feeling that a loss of home, was that a feeling that also passed on to you that I lost my home? Or what did you think home was for you?
It was so strange that for me, the home at that point was the place I was living in. That's what and it was my mother and my father and my sister, that, or probably this whole mohalla
The
that was
mohalla you
living
were in.
together. So we were rather perplexed, because any good celebration or any other moments were in some sense related to the home that has been lost. So if they were there, but we had never seen that home, maybe in pictures, and but we couldn't relate to it.
Yeah.
You need that physicality to engage with. So for us, the home was this, where we were living. This was sharing, this was everything. So those things have always remained as questions, but I think now in retrospective I'm talking about these things because I take a cue from these whole things what had happened. But today it's not personal. I think today where I want to take the work further is in the space of histories, in the space of larger histories, where we're talking about human displacement, and how my influences, my personal narratives engage with history, literature, cinema, music, and it talks about a larger space of belonging. So that's where I'm talking about. So rather than just a specific thing. Yeah.
That's amazing. When you read about history, I think it's also very different perspectives from different people when they cover history, right? Like when you look at the colonial period, when you look at literature from people who were living in India, it'll be much different than what the Britishers wrote when they were here.
Yeah.
And even in the Britishers, I think there's a segregation, as some would see India as their home, whereas others would see it as a place that they're trying to oppress and suck out of whatever wealth and great things that we have. Um, when there is something that you haven't experienced by yourself and you take in all these different perspectives, it also feels like a big responsibility on your shoulders that am I really showing it in the right manner or not? Is that something that you also engage with as a thought?
Certainly, I think probably especially that history engages me as one of the spaces of my engagement within my work. I think I always think there is a necessity to read different perspectives, because in some ways within my work or within the space, what I loosely say investigation or engagement with the idea, in some way I'm not actually looking for any specific answer, but it's like a plethora of information that conjoins, that triggers a certain kind of thinking which creates, within which I create my work. So you know writers like Edward Said, people like Borges, Dostoevsky, or in the Indian space, you see Gayatri Spivak and much maligned monster Partha Mehta, or Romila Thapar. You read different perspectives. I think especially in today's age where there's information available from the last 2 decades, if I would like to say, the information is some way has become a space of knowledge. I think because we are bombarded with so much data, so much information, misinformation, I think that somehow today there should be a more importance of reading books and multiple perspectives rather than just going with an opinion. I think I try to base my research on that through finding one space and then trying to investigate multiple perspectives. So, yeah.
And how far back have you gone in your study of history?
So it has been what has I have kind of consolidated within my space, although I keep going out. We're talking about the formation of nation states in the 16th, 17th century Europe. I think because if you're talking about what phenomena are happening right now and the idea of modernity and the Gandhian perspective at that point during the one has to go back in history, which is I'm talking about 16th century where this the idea of nation state came into Baru. So all those things I started from post partition, but it's to understand it. I think I keep going back in time.
Do you believe that history repeats itself?
Well, I rather than repeating itself, I think it has enough information for us to learn from it and to engage with the present, keeping the past in the mind.
So the past has a place in the future,
Yes,
right?
yes.
I completely agree. I think that it has a place and there's so much to consume from it. Of course, there are right and wrong things, some things that may be applicable, some things that may not be. But there's enough learnings for us to make that judgment, to consume enough to see what can be applied to the present and the future.
Yeah.
But I personally read a lot about like Indian history and pre Mughal era or even Mughal era and pre Mughal era. And I think there's a lot about India that we as Indians also don't know. Just the kind of wealth we had as a country that was supplying so much in terms of exports to all of Europe, be it spices, be it textile, be it jewelry. I think all of those things are things that we need to take pride in as a country, and we need to sort of like bring that revival back. I hate the fact when anyone says that India is a third world country when we were like the primary civilization in the entire world. And I think that that place remains because we have such a big history and such high like cultural resonance. What is your
And certainly, I mean, one would not disagree with anything you say, but the idea of India as a nation state is a very recent phenomenon because, as you know, we were kingdoms actually. We were different part of this South Asia. We were different kingdoms. So I think certainly looking back into the ancestry and the revival of crafts and culture is a very important thing. But also with that, the proper understanding of political history is also, I think, a very important part of it because sometimes going back in time, you can also create a sense of false nationalism. So I think it is very important to know when we are talking about a nation state, but in history, it is a very recent phenomena. So if we are equating back to a pre-nation state time, we are not talking about just India.
yeah.
So that's what my take on that would be.
No, absolutely agreed.
Yeah.
And I think this happens all the time is that we pick up pieces that fit our narrative and
Yes.
they become our like collective truth,
Yes.
which may not be the appropriate thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
But let's come back. You were working at Samsung, traveling a lot to Japan, to Korea. What kind of art were you consuming in Japan as well? Because I know there are some amazing artists there. Again, a country with very rich history,
Yeah.
great culture. What were things that have left an impact on you? And were those things that sort of made you feel that I want to do something in this space as well?
So I wouldn't just confine it to one place because it was a phenomena for me that travel, even it was China or it was Sri Lanka where I was traveling at that moment. So my attempt was to engage with the arts. But while engaging with the arts, I think this my own personal endeavor of engaging with arts made sense to me, especially looking at it, as I told you, especially in Korea, South Korea, because I was a very frequently I would visit Korea. There was a minimalism movement at that point, and especially talking about war and the kind of impact it has left on the country and in South Asia. So I think those became the areas of my engagement with art, and that was a moment I knew that what I want to articulate in my life or engage with would be through arts, and this would, and it was a very as I told you, it was a decision taken out of passion, of understanding something in that moment. And then I kind of built on it, and I felt things were missing. I need to inform myself that that journey happened over the time, not in that one moment, definite moment. I knew everything.
But as a middle class Indian, it's a huge leap to go from being an engineer to being an artist. How was that transition for you?
I think it was certainly difficult. I think especially to be a young artist in a context. I can talk about India. I think with at that time spaces, it's you are earning every month, and you are used to a certain kind of lifestyle. I think, and especially coming from a family who's left everything and assembled themselves in new space. So it was a difficult decision, but then for me, I think my quest was this. This is what I wanted to do, and and I would do anything to pursue this at that time. Also, my association I had somehow in those times, I had, even today, I have friends who were elder than me in their 60s, in their 50s, and my conversations about them were about their lives. I think everything has informed me. So for me, I don't use the word self-taught. I think for me, I've learned from so many people, and I'm still in the space where I am learning every day. I think is one reason I don't use the word self-taught. It is learning through others' experiences. Of course, my curiosity, my engagement with what I wanted to do, but there is so much to learn, from others, their experiences. So, yeah.
And so, what were the first art pieces you mentioned? You were doing a lot about depicting the city as it was growing, the vertical growth. And then, how did it start transitioning to where you are as an artist now?
So, at that moment, it was about this space of migration in the sense of for economic betterment or your job. And I was engaging with the city for its culture, something that I've never seen. So everything was like a visually for me, it was something really magical, So I
And Delhi
think,
was also in its growth phase then.
yes.
This was late 2000s,
Uh, 2008, yes.
8, 9.
So the cities were, especially the space of Noida, Greater Noida, everything was being developed. This gigantic highways, the Yamuna Expressway,
Metro was coming in.
metro was coming in. So it all became a kind of a fantasy thing that you would see in films, in Europe or something. So I think that became a very integral part of my image making. And
And this was because you were commenting on the time, or was it something that you were personally engaging with and felt that I need to display this in my art?
I think for me, it became a certain kind of archive, or for myself, I'm not uh, of what I was looking at around, from this small cabin in my one of this huge buildings where I was working. You could just see sections of the city. So if you see those works, they're not typical landscapes, but they are landscapes without the horizon, about these forms and structures merging into each other in really bright, vibrant colors.
When
So,
you say bright, vibrant colors, were these also minimal, or was it more
no,
maximum
I think it
expression?
was probably on the maximum, the pop culture. That's what I was trying to see and maybe formulate as an idea within my work. But I think my when I quit my job and I shifted to Baroda, I think my world of art really opened up. I started reading. I was not an avid reader before, but spaces of political histories, spaces of culture, music, they all became part of my curriculum, as I told you, those 4 years, and it just became my world. It was something that I was wearing or it became of who I was, my DNA at that point. And I think that's where, if you see, I was still working with forms and structures for a long time, but it was then the idea of kind of deconstructing certain spaces. And how would I replace them in a new space? It's just the idea of migration, how people are forced to come out of their spaces and they integrate into new spaces which are different culturally, different geographically. So, how do they inhabit those spaces? I think that's what where the language transformed itself
Your own personal.
into a space of monochromatics. I think for me at that point, color did not play a role for my articulation. Not that I'm saying I would never use color, but right now in the last 1 decade of work that I have done, it is a monochromatic palette, whether it is photographs, whether it is drawings, whether it is using material like layers of paper or burning the paper. All those have become part of a kind of more emphasis on the act itself rather than using. So I would say probably 2015-16 is when that transition of the language itself happened. Yes.
Whenever I see people who don't conceptually engage with art, they tend to comment on the art as it is on the surface. So whenever I see people who look at like abstract art, the usual commentary is, I can paint this. What's so fascinating about it? Or when they see something which is done more finely, is more maximal, it feels like more daunting. Whereas when it's a minimal, like when it's a Rothko, they feel, oh, I can splatter paint like this. Like, what's so fascinating about it? Do you usually get that commentary, or do you engage with that commentary at all?
These things are bound to happen, and one has to look at the kind of certain space of trajectory and how these language structures get formulated. I think that would be a better way of looking at art in that sense. But yes, I mean, you would engage with certain kind of comments and things. And I think as an artist, it is your personal quest and a journey. For me, every line that I make is a different line, and sometimes it becomes an act of a conversation with the self. So when I'm actually working, I am in conversation with myself on many things.
Yeah.
And the deliberate act of stopping the line where I want to is also a deliberate act.
I think that's the part people don't understand, is that sometimes they think that art is made for viewers, but art is actually made because the artist wants to make it a certain way. So when people look at a Jackson Pollock or a Mark Rothko and they think, ऐसे तो कोई भी paint फेंक सकता है, but he knows when to stop that paint, where to splatter it, how to splatter it, and that's the unique part that he brings as an artist that not everyone can.
Yes, I think these are multiple perspectives, and then you have people who really, I have had students just young, 8. I mean, and why should I be amazed? I wasn't amazed. I was delighted actually to hear somebody from an 8th standard in a school where I was giving a presentation talk about why is there a noise in your work? Why is there a disturbance in your work? And, do you have moments like that as well? Where rather than looking at this work as just a space of meditativeness, which I don't use as a word, but so, you have people like that also, I think. So it's always something brings different perspectives.
There's a huge spectrum of how
Yes.
viewers will engage with art.
Yeah. So I'm looking towards those kind of engagements.
But does that ever like affect you or alter the way you make art, or are these thoughts that come to your mind when you're working on a different art piece?
No, I don't think the external factors of how people view my work really come into the space of art making for me. I think it's much more of like somebody does a research, and some researches keep going on for years. Maybe people die and it still continues.
Yeah.
I think for me, it's that the space of art making is that. So those factors, I really like engaging with people on openings and when they're talking about work. But I think for me, when I'm in my studio, it is what I want to achieve from my work, and how I want to engage with my work is what really becomes the space of practice for me. Yeah.
I recently overheard this at the art fair. An artist was talking to someone and they said, it's amazing to come at a fair like this because I can actually engage with buyers and understand what they're looking for and like tweak my expression accordingly. And that's when I started thinking that no matter how personal it is, there's an aspect of balancing your personal life also where you're making a living off of the art that you make. So, how do you balance those two things together?
Well, those things are certainly, I mean, I have heard it many times. But I think, in that sense, for me, the journey in art has been, if you know, it has been something that I wanted to pursue, except apart from economics. I think I was, in that sense, lucky enough. In my initial years, I got this 1 year grant when I was in collective studio, so it was a completely taken care of. So I got a stipend and I was engaging with art as I wanted to. And post that also, I have actually, along with supporting what I wanted to do, I had I have done textile designing, I have done corporate workshops, which became a part of my economics. So fortunately, also, and as an idea also, I always kept that space of economics separate from what I was doing as an artist.
So, there's purity to your art, but it doesn't corrupt you in any way or your expression.
I wouldn't use the word purity, but yes, I kept my space of art independent from other spaces. So I could engage it with the way I wanted to, if I would like to put it in that sense. Yes.
Nice.
Yeah. So, and it's been over a decade in Baroda as a so I, I now I'm fortunately engaged more with my own practice rather than the supportive means. But yeah, so it's been like that since.
I read somewhere that you describe your artworks as activated linear whispers. I was very curious. What does that mean? How do you explain that?
So it was in a context of where my uh, the various engagements that come into my work, because for me a lot of these works exist as installations or three-dimensional spaces. So I finally kind of formulate these ideas into a two-dimensional space, and that's my insistence, at least for now. I am not engaging with the idea of three-dimensionality in the terms of sculptures or installations.
But initially, you form an idea as a 3D and
They
then you
do.
translate to 2D.
They do sometimes, but my insistence is how can I maximize the use of a two-dimensional space? How can that I can create that space of movement within the space using just a pencil? Those were my initial works.
So you quite literally think outside the canvas and then bring it back onto the canvas.
Yes, absolutely. And it is an insistence to use minimal representation. How just with the space of dot or a line, you can create that space of it's like a riyaz, it's like somebody who's playing a sitar, that right tension that leads to the notations. I think, just as a metaphor, if I use. So for me, this continuous dialogue with the self of a lot of unanswered questions or a quest of knowing something, not particularly for its answers, but on this journey of ciphering through so many things, on this journey of engaging with something, that becomes very fundamental to my work. So the linear whispers are these conversations and the space of two-dimensionality that I am engaging with.
Does that also mean that you view your art getting progressively better or more refined since you're building up on it as like a riyaz or as a block system where every time you're learning and learning?
I look at it as a constant dialogue. It is because that's the one reason I never title my works, and it's been always untitled, because in some way I'm dealing with an idea over different instances of time and certain memories that kind of reconfigure themselves into new spaces. So whether it is better or it's the word like progressing, I don't know about that. But I think I am constantly pushing myself to look at some things and articulate or decipher meanings through my information over different instances of time.
Do you think giving a title to an artwork limits the perception of it?
Well, I can talk about my works, but I think for me, I haven't felt the necessity as of now because I want viewers to engage with the work, with their personal experience. Of course, when I'm displaying my works in a show, there is a text about my engagement as an artist, and then it gives you that whole room of, rather than specifying you on a specific direction, it gives you that space to know my world and then engage with it. Because for me, as I was we were talking earlier, the space of uh, viewers engagement through their personal experience is something that I want to engage with in my art. So how they look at it is also a part of the work that I do.
So I only know Zarina, who was the Indian, who was a part of the. Well, I know Zarina as the one Indian printmaker who was a part of the minimalist movement. I don't know many other artists, but what are other Indian artists that sort of left an impact on you or inspired you in many, many ways? Could you probably name some?
There are many, I mean, also Western, but people like Zarina Hashmi, of course, and Nasreen Mohammadi. And if you talk about the West, people like Solovit, Agnes Martin, they became initial spaces of engagement for me, the arts that I was looking at. And But then over the time, a lot of things have kind of sown within my work. It's like we talk about a space of something that inspires you, but then over the time, how it kind of sows you into your own DNA. I think how it becomes you. So if I'm talking about artists like Solovate, if you see, I'm certain language structures, but my articulation or my research is my own personal. So language, yes, maybe these were the artists that I was looking at initially.
And what were some like films or music that you heard that felt
you know
like,
Music, especially the Western classical,
yeah.
the 20th century Western classical music, people like John Cage, talk about people now, people like Arvo Part, Olafur Arnalds.
I read Akira Kurosawa was a big
Yeah.
inspiration to you.
So there was this time of looking at films, people like Akira Kurosawa, Redbeard, or
You've also seen all of Satyajit Ray's work?
yes, of course.
Because I think Kurosawa has that famous quote, right? That if you haven't seen Ray's work, it's like not having seen the sun.
Absolutely. And the idea of the theater, especially somebody like people like Tarkovsky, and why you make a film and that film has that space of theatrics. I think for me, what I am looking in cinema or the classics because we have a whole lot of itinerary which would last you a year or so if you start looking at it every day. So it's more about to do with, as I was saying, why. So when I'm looking at this one still from a Kurosawa or a Tarkovsky or the Ray, what it triggers for me, I think sometimes those are more important things for me. Even as a text, like I'm reading Dostoevsky or I'm reading, Borges. So certain texts sometimes trigger a certain kind of space of my investigation within my work. I think I that becomes a kind of lead for me to take from there and start engaging with these ideas. For example, one of the works that I recently did was this piercing on this translucent paper. So, where this translucent paper for me becomes a metaphor of skin. I was reading about in one of these books about this idea of migration where this whole lot of people from Iraq were migrating to Macedonian border, and the laws of migration changed because the government changed there. So they were left on the border between no man's land and in this freezing temperatures. And as an act of resistance, they didn't take up arms or violent approach. They actually started stitching their lips, and they just stood in front of the border.
Wow.
So I think those kind of acts where you can easily take to violence, and yet you make a point that you wouldn't, and these kind of strong protests, they remain in my head, and this whole idea that they have to live with these marks forever in their life now. So that becomes a starting point of looking in the direction of, maybe if I'm using a material, why I'm using a transparent paper, why I'm using these layers, why I'm using hand piercing on it. So just to kind of tell you how I arrive at a work.
So everything is intentional, and inspiration for you is practically everywhere.
Yes, I think everything within my work is intentional, what I want to. Although I'm open to the process, during the process, there are a lot of things that I may like to engage, but then everything is intentional what I do. And yes, because I am dealing with the world I want to engage with in the way I want to, I think a lot of these things become part and parcel of my everyday thinking or conversation, or even like a everyday practice as a human. The acts of somebody like Nelson Mandela or Gandhi, those kind of things. Not that I'm saying I'm a Gandhian or something, but those ideas become something that I want to engage with history as.
From what I've learned, your art comes from themes like displacement. So it's a lot of pain that translates through these works. Are you of that like cliched opinion that great pain makes beautiful art, or is it just something that you personally connect with more so than anything else?
I wouldn't put it that black and white. I think in any quest of knowing what you are doing, whether it's even a craftsman or somebody who's just engaging with a space of innovation or an everyday practice, I think it is much more to translate what you see around you and how one can actually conjoin these spaces of a lot of information that we gather into a space of understanding or a space of knowledge for ourselves, and then how we present, if we are artists, if we are musicians, if we are even homemakers, if we are engaging with people on everyday basis. I think for me, being a person, individual, or an artist is one and the same thing. So my dealings as a human are more as important as I engage with my work. So I don't know if I have answered your specific question, but yeah.
But what part of it gives you the most amount of joy? Is it the completion of an art piece? Is it the display of it with people engaging with it? Or is it something else? Is it the process?
I think uh, for me, as I said, work is some kind of discourse with myself. So I think the my interest lies how I formulate the next work when I'm working on this work. So because sometimes I am using material in the terms of thread, and for that whole process to engage with material and drawing and my articulation and my engagement in texts, those all become the space which I don't know whether I would say it is joy, but yes, when you engage with people and in front of your work, and I think there are so many things to learn for myself also, because you deal with so many people from varied experiences in life. So yes, I'm always open to that, to know and maybe kind of take something from those conversations, which may become part of this whole tapestry of something that I am weaving within my work.
Is there ever a comment about your artwork by someone else that made you very emotional?
Not emotional, but certainly kind of like I was talking about to you about this young kid, and who was talking about his understanding of my work where he's seeing a lot of noise, although it looks so quiet. I think those kind of things, in some way, for me, become points where I was, as we were talking earlier, that people look at things in different way, and so I think that becomes a space, because you have architects coming who will talk about space, and how these these two-dimensional spaces look like they exist. So I think those kind of conversations, whether you have musicians, and you're talking about the word tension within the string which creates the music, those kind of things, yes, I think for me that space of conversation is something that I take back home and it resonates in my head, you know and I'm not sure how it would translate, but it certainly remains something that I take it with myself always, so yeah.
I've seen a lot of your work also has Morse code. Can I know why?
So that work actually came, that was the initial way of transforming the work, was like these it was a war language, the space of information, this coding and decoding. But in the larger scheme of what I was doing, it was about it was through the perception of my own personal experiences, and people are going to decode it in their own manner. So these texts that I was reading, and as I told you, sometimes I extract these texts from the book because they fit into the space of my articulation exactly the way they are. So those texts I started to convert into Morse codes, and I was looking at this space. For me, the space of digital has always fascinated me, in the sense of minimalism, of you have data all across the world that is enormous, in the just zeros and ones. So I think that always kind of, that when you say, when you have something so little and you can make infinity out of it, that has always kind of uh, puzzled me, or kind of uh, kept my senses awake, that it's not necessary you need to have so much.
That's the power of minimalism,
Yeah,
right? Like it could
yeah,
be beautifully layered, but
yeah,
on the surface
yeah,
come as one,
yeah,
as very
yeah,
minimal.
yeah. And you have music, Satsur,
Mm-hmm.
and all the music that has been made, is being made, will be made, is out of these seven sources. So this whole idea, the language, the alphabet, you have just limited things out of which you make this enormous vocabulary which is infinite. So I think within that space, that's how I'm also looking at my work. How, with something, just a dot, or just the act of burning, or the act of sewing just a white thread, how can I create that space of infinite articulation, as I was telling you, over different instances of time? So I think for me, it's more important to keep looking back and keep re-articulating certain things in the new time. So
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I don't think there's anything, personally, I feel there's no thing that is minimal entirely or maximal entirely. I think everything sort of like seeps into each other. I read this interview a couple years back about Pharrell Williams and Neptune's, their music producers, pretty big. And it talked about how their music is maximally minimal, that it's so much that comes together, but it comes together sonically in such a pleasant manner that it seems minimal, but it's layered immensely. And I think that's how a lot of great art is that on the surface it may seem minimal, but the kind of layers that's been built pre its execution really makes it shine and really makes it stand out more so.
yeah, I think it's just a small thing that it's actually sometimes just looking at still water. You are just looking at waves, but you are looking at different waves in different instances of time. So I think a lot of these things are something that engage me. I think that small little acts, or small little things which keep repeating themselves, but yet they are not same. I think that's what I am looking at.
As someone who has been as curious as you and has somehow downloaded a new perspective on seeing things, what are some ways that you recommend other people to freshen up their perspective? Can they read something? Can they listen to something? Can they subscribe to some sort of content that can maybe refresh the way they look at things?
I think the best way, I mean, I don't know whether I would be able to give a particular answer to something like that. But I think the best thing is actually to read books. I think the act of reading is becoming really less. That's what I personally feel, because sometimes I also feel myself kind of engaged with this information that's I don't want, but it's being bombarded to me. And then I'm curious about certain things. I think one has to distinguish between information and knowledge
Mhm.
and fact finding, and that's very important. And to engage, and you have today, you have availability of books, which is so easy, and as we were talking earlier about our own histories, I think that's important, to read the multiple perspectives rather than jumping into certain narratives become dominant, because that's how history is. Also, what's dominant, what has been written, is what becomes ultimate. But I think there is today, you have a lot of blogs, you have so much information. If you really want to,
Mhm.
you are curious, I think to expose yourself to something that's, you may also think it's not for you. I think it broadens your perspective of understanding things.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So, we recently did a collection called Zarina, inspired by the artist, and it talked about the idea of home because the artist dealt with that theme throughout her life. For someone who also deals with very similar themes and has shifted through many cities, what is the idea of home to you now?
I think for me, the idea of home, in a very strange way, has never been about brick and mortar. So it has actually been where I would engage with people, and I would feel that space of common sharing and engaging of ideas, which nurtures me, and probably something that I may give back to that space or people. So the engagement of home, for me, it's been people,
Mhm.
ideas, and engagement that has led. I mean, I've shifted so many places, and I think for me, Baroda is home, for the very reason I have the space where you are challenged to your own ideas every day, and it kind of propels you in a collective sense to know and to engage with things more. So I think home for me has been that.
I think for Zarina too, home is the feeling that she carried with herself throughout her life, wherever
Yeah,
she went.
yeah.
And that's what we tried to translate into clothing as well, that you could wear a piece of garment and it could make you feel like you're at home. And it could be experiences like sitting down and having a conversation like this, which may make someone feel like they're at home. Or it could be just sitting with your friends under a random tree, talking about random things. And that feeling in itself is home. And it's not just the physicality of being in a brick and mortar space, as you mentioned. So I completely agree with you.
Yeah. Although maybe it's also the sense of privilege for me, because I have found these spaces,
Hmm.
and and for some people, like today, you have war areas like the space of Ukraine or Gaza, where I don't know how it would feel, what would be the sense of home for them, because they lost a shelter, and overnight you're displaced from your security, space where you were safe or it was private, and you are moving to these open spaces. So yes, I for me it means this, but I'm sure the sense of shelter is so relevant in today's days and time, where people get displaced forcefully.
Yeah.
So yeah.
No, I mean, that's a very fresh perspective because I never thought about it that way. But you're absolutely right that the fact that I and you have a brick and mortar home that we can actually call and go back to, that we think of having that feeling somewhere else also. But for someone who loses that, they want that more than anything else.
Mhm. Yeah.
For someone who's always intersected art and technology, what does AI mean to you now? How do you think that will change your work or just art at large?
I don't think it would kind of the space of uh, what I take from technology is in a very different manner, because I engage with technology, as an idea.
You don't use it as an aid in your expression.
Yes, for now, I have not been using it as an aid in my expression. So I think the space of AI, we embrace technology. I think uh, things used where it can assist human beings, why not? I think, and it comes with its own dangers. I think so was the internet, and so I think everything that comes, there is a kind of skepticism, there is optimism attached to it, but it's for the time to unfold. I think, but if I think AI used for human assistance, it can be very magical, especially in the spaces where it's really needed, in floods, in places of war, where it can assist people. I think it's a great tool which can really aid many things which cannot humans can't do in these unprecedented situations. Like we had massive floods in Baroda. We have every 3-4 years. You have some people who are well to do. It's not, but they have no water, they have no food. There is no way of reaching them. So I think technology, especially AI, used in certain circumstances is would be a fabulous thing.
It's going to be immensely beneficial
Yeah.
if used the right way.
Yeah. So was the internet, in the 90s. I mean, the whole excitement about internet when we were young, it can be used in any ways, So it's up to us it's like we're talking about history. It's up to us how we want to engage with it and how we want to decipher, how curious are we to know more about it. So that's what my take on AI would be. Yeah.
Lastly, as someone who went from a traditional career as an engineer to becoming an artist and really following your passion, what is an advice that you would give to a young person now who may be passionate about something but who would have hesitations just because of their surroundings and what people tell them?
So I think if it's really that you want to do it, but challenge will be always part of it. I think sometimes, not often, but sometimes I do get asked this question: how can you kind of jump over this space of the hardship or the challenge? I don't have an answer for that. I think you that is part of it. Although we are in a space where we talk about smart work is surpassing hard work, that's what probably is. But I think your own quest is more important, and the space of challenge is part of the journey. I think as an artist, you're struggling every day, not in the sense of maybe space of finances or other things. The quest to know is also a space of challenge. So I think if it's really you want to do, well, the struggle will be a part of it,
Yeah,
and I
be
think,
prepared for like the physical and the emotional challenges.
yes. I think I think probably at this moment there are so many avenues to support, in some sense. One, in today's day and age, working digitally and all that can create a lot of other avenues also to support what they want to do. Not to say that's true for everyone, but yes, I think it's finally about finding what you really want to do, and that would actually come from exposing yourself to many things. That's, I think, more important, because even if you're an engineer or a doctor, the spaces of arts, politics, and all that, I think if one engages with those ideas, one gets to know what one really wants to myself more. I think that's what happened in my case. Although there was something that I wanted to study as an arts, but over the years, I was glad I went to this whole cycle. And for me, why I say it was the first independent decision, because it was no interference from anybody. It was my decision to quit job and pursue arts and take the consequences of it. I think,
When you make a decision, you have to be okay with the repercussions of it also.
and one knows it. At that moment, I really knew, I mean, what I was doing, and so that's the long and short of what I would like to say.
Yeah, but I mean, as we were discussing, now more so than ever, there's a huge audience for art in this country. I mean, India Art Fair last weekend was a testament to it, where it was at capacity Saturday, Sunday, people flocking in thousands just to consume the art that there is.
Yeah.
So if someone really cares to be an artist, I think now is the time more so than ever has been.
Certainly, I think it's always the right time to follow what you really want to do. I think one has to be just persistent and uh, success. Also, the word success is a strange thing for me. I think one has to realize that it's more important to than anything else to keep pursuing. I think that's very important.
So the journey is more important
Yeah.
than the
The
destination.
pursuit, yes, the pursuit of doing something is very important than just to know, because it's also very not a very definitive term, because as an artist, it's always it's never certain, you are it's that's how the fields of arts are. So
Yeah.
So
Now I know there's nothing for certain, but you've been an artist for about a decade now.
yeah.
Practicing as an artist for a decade now. I'm sure you were an artist much before too. But what does the next decade look for you going ahead? What do you have planned? Are there any new things that you want to try? Any new mediums that you want to explore?
So, at the back of my mind, there are many things, like uh, the current work that I'm doing with threads, and it has been in my head, the whole idea of this white thread from the last 5 6 years. But I think for me, the fascination of the material is not something that makes me engage with it. I think it is how that material will fit into my articulation. So a lot of things maybe get done 5 years later when I know this material finds the space within my work. So as I was telling about this thread, is now I knew why I wanted to use it, or the act of burning paper. Sometimes you look at the process, but it may just come into the space of your articulation, or may not. You reject so many things in your head, and take a few. So that's a space of unpredictability, and also a space of something that one discovers with time.
That's the beauty of
Yeah.
it altogether.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I wish you the best for the next how many ever years you keep pursuing your art, and I wish to look forward to your art as and when you make more.
Thank you so much. It
And
was such
thanks
a
for being
pleasure.
here.
It was such a pleasure
I
talking
got to
you.
learn so much from you.
No, thank you. It was a very lovely conversation that I had with you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.